No, not really. I want to know what you guys think about Trump showing up with Big Macs and water in East Palestine. I mean, he's a media genius. He beat Buttigieg to East Palestine.
Yeah.
That was
unbelievable.
I literally pull up my tweet. I think this is the power. We because Trump has been out of the public discourse for 2 years.
He's a media savant.
He is a media savant. Literally, Biden is in Ukraine, saber rattling over air sirens that may or may not be true.
They were fake.
Who cares? Well, who cares anyway?
Well, no.
It doesn't matter.
No, it does matter. No, hold on. We do. Actually,
how do you know you were there?
Okay, because
I
don't need to be. Hold on a second. I don't need to be there because Jake Sullivan participated in a press conference, and he was asked by a CBS News reporter if the U.S. gave the Russians any kind of heads up that the president was going to be in Kyiv. And what Sullivan said, and I quote, is, "We did notify the Russians that President Biden will be traveling to Kyiv. We did so some hours before his departure for deconfliction purposes." You know what deconfliction is?
Right.
It's when the U.S. tries to avoid an accidental conflict. And, Putin's not crazy enough to try and assassinate Biden. So the Russians were not attacking Kyiv that day. In fact, they haven't attacked Kyiv, as far as I know, for weeks. So these air raid sirens were basically just pure theater. But the amazing thing is that if you don't know that Biden orchestrated is my point. People on your side. It. Come on, Jason. Don't be so gullible.
But that doesn't mean Biden pressed the button. So don't also take it to the other extreme.
Please.
It was theater. Who knows why the siren went off? But put it aside.
This was a joint event between the Biden administration and the Zelensky team. They organized it. The whole thing was choreographed. Okay. How did that red carpet get there, Jason? Was that an accident too?
Okay, let's put that aside.
You're acting like this is just accidental. I mean, how gullible
Let me
are
give you your GOP. Let me give you your GOP win. Donald Trump is a savant, and he went to America, to the place that we were reporting on the underreported story. People in East Palestine are being ignored, and he comes there to help the people of America. I give you all credit. Your guy, Sachs, did the most amazing media move in history. He went to Middle America where people are suffering, as opposed to a war that nobody wants to be in and spend all that money on. We won't spend money cleaning up East Palestine, but we will go spend billions in Ukraine. Go.
All right. You want to know what this reminded me of? And you may think this is a weird connection, but it reminded me of the ending to the movie Boys in the Hood. Do you remember what happens at the end of that movie?
No, I haven't seen it in years. Go.
Okay. Well, it's 30 years old, but Ice Cube, plays this character Doughboy, and his brother gets killed.
Yep.
And at the very end of the movie, he gives this speech to Cuba Gooding Jr. where he says, I turned on the TV and there was all this shit about violence in a foreign land, and there was nothing on my brother getting killed. All this stuff about what's happening in foreign countries, nothing about what's happening here. And then I think the most memorable line was, either they don't know, don't show, or they don't care what's going on in the hood.
Right.
So what's going on here is the people of East Palestine, Ohio, are being engulfed in a plume of carcinogens and toxins. And Biden is off pursuing this crusade in eastern Ukraine. And it's not just him. I'll dish out to Mitch McConnell as well. Mitch McConnell was on TV.
Those are the neocons of our neocons, yeah.
McConnell was on TV saying that the number one priority of the United States right now is defeating Russia in Ukraine. It's not helping the people of Ohio. It is not securing the border. It is not solving crime in our cities. It is not making our schools better. It's running off and basically supporting this war in Ukraine. So both these octogenarians, Biden and McConnell both, they either don't know, don't show, or they don't care what is happening in the United States of America.
He's a genius.
But it's not even genius. I mean, it's so obvious that you go there.
It is so obvious. Nobody wants to be in a forever wall.
Buttigieg didn't go there, and Biden didn't go there. It's not genius. It's
DeSantis didn't go there. Where's DeSantis? He should have gone.
He hasn't declared yet. He hasn't declared yet.
Make a trip.
I think the most senior Democratic person that went over there was Josh Shapiro, who's the governor of Pennsylvania. He got there before Buttigieg.
What is going on? It's a never-ending war. And so, this is nobody wants to fight a never-ending war. This is what got Bush in trouble, right? Like, this was the big critique. It's like, we're spending all this money over in the Middle East on these conflicts.
Well, you're talking about Bush Sr. Yeah. So let's contrast this with Bush Sr. I think actually it's a good analogy. So with Bush Sr., Bush actually, this is in 1991, he won the Iraq War. That was actually a stunning foreign policy success because he actually didn't go too far. He didn't go all the way on the road to Baghdad the way that his son, George W. Bush, would, creating an epic disaster. So Bush 41 delivered a victory there, and he still lost election. Why? Because he seemed out of touch. He wasn't focused on domestic problems. The American people want an American president to focus on American problems. And even if Biden delivers some sort of victory in Ukraine, if he ignores these festering problems at home, then he is, I think, vulnerable for this reelection. But I think the truth of the matter is that this war is going to turn out much worse than the Iraq War did in 1991, because in 91, we showed restraint and we knew what our vital interest was, and we kept our objectives limited and we kept the timetable very short. What is Biden doing here? Biden won't tell us what the objective is. It's just whatever the Ukrainians want. He won't tell us what the timetable is. It's basically for as long as it takes. And then meanwhile, this week, you had Kamala Harris go to the Munich summit declaring that the Russians are guilty of crimes against humanity, which that's something that we could have assessed after the war. Think about the incentives you're now giving the Russian leadership. Before, we said that we just wanted them to leave. When you accuse them of war crimes, it implies that we're going to go chasing them all the way to Moscow. They're not going to want to end this war. They can be put on trial at The Hague. I mean, this is highly inflammatory. So, this thing is not going in the right direction.
Yeah. And that was the thing I didn't like about Biden's speech over there, is just he's escalating. Hey, that we have to stop Putin. I mean, which you do. He did invade another country. He did cause 300,000 or 400,000 Russians have died, according to reports. Over 100,000 Ukrainians have died, according to reports. Neither side is giving the accurate number because they don't want to demoralize their constituents. But the amount of suffering going on here is extraordinary. And I think it should be the West who is going, send Macron, send somebody from Germany, send some, group of people to then go to Ukraine and work this out. But you don't need to have Biden going there saber rattling. It was too much saber rattling for me.
It is.
And not enough de-escalation. We need de-escalation in these situations, not saber rattling.
I agree with you, Jason, but Biden has really painted himself into a corner here, because before the war, he refused to take NATO expansion off the table. He refused to recognize the Russian interest in Crimea. And we gave no support to the Minsk Accords, which would have given some limited autonomy to the Russian speakers in the Donbass area. If we had just done those three things, there would have been no war. Biden refused to do that. He refuses to take NATO expansion off the table even today. So he has nothing to compromise with. He is dug in. And the problem we have now is that it's a lose-lose scenario. If the Ukrainians keep doing poorly, because right now it looks like they're on the back foot, what is the United States going to do? We're going to let them lose this war? Or are we going to keep giving them more aid and step in? It looks to me like Biden now has invested his whole presidency in this, and he can't just let them lose, which means more escalation from us.
Huge mistake.
And on the Russian side, if the Russians lose, then they have an incentive to use nuclear weapons to rescue the situation. So it seems to me that both scenarios here are really bad, and we don't really have a good way out of this. We're looking for some sort of magical Goldilocks scenario where the Russians sort of lose, but not enough to use nukes. The administration has not given us a clear picture of what victory looks like here that's actually reasonably achievable in a reasonable time frame at a reasonable cost.
What do we think, Friedberg, of Xi Jinping making overtures and, hey, maybe we should work towards peace if you follow the money? He wants cheap oil. He wants this thing to end, and he wants the West to be buying goods from China. The West wants to sell a bunch of armaments. The military-industrial complex is absolutely in delight of replenishing all of these weapons. Perhaps a little cynical, the follow the money concept, but what was your take on the chessboard of Xi Jinping is going to visit Putin before Biden does? And he wants to build bridges, and we want to saber rattle. What are your thoughts? If any.
Isn't he getting China buys energy from Russia today. They buy oil
on sale
at a very cheap price. So if I'm China, I want this to last longer, don't I? Like, why would I want to end this and then have Russia's markets open up? Because if their markets open up, then markets normalize to market prices. Right now, they're getting a discount. So I think rather they certainly don't want things to escalate. The question is, how quickly do they want them to de-escalate? So if I'm China, I'm kind of probably playing a little bit of a middle line here. I obviously don't want to see a big hot war. China's got its own domestic problems right now that seem pretty significant and existential. And having access to cheap energy seems like a benefit Obviously, if there was significant conflict and escalation of conflict, that would be very bad from an economic perspective for China. So they're probably somewhere in the middle, like a slow resolution, let's say. I don't know. I mean, this is pure speculation. This is just me guessing.
Europe, Sachs or Chamath, Europe isn't going to buy Putin's oil anytime soon, right? They're now going to buy...
No, but he's able to sell it to China, and he's able to sell it to India and the rest of the world. There was actually an article in today's New York Times about how the West may be unified about Ukraine, but the rest of the world is not. The article was saying something that critics of the war said for a while, which is we actually don't have the whole world with us at all. The BRICS countries are not with us. The emerging world, the whole Southern Hemisphere basically is not with us. They would like the U.S. to play a more constructive role in finding a peace deal, not, like you said, Jason, saber-rattling or escalating. So the rest of the world is not happy with us, and this is why the Russian sanctions have not been effective. I think the Russian economy's had like a 3 to 4% hit. It is not the collapse that was predicted, because there are enough other countries willing to do business with them.
Would this have happened, Chamath, if Trump was president? And how would Trump have handled it, do you think? Just game theory here. I'm just curious. Because Trump almost won, right? I mean, if Trump had won, what would this look like? Would Putin have gone in there if Trump was president? And how would Trump have handled it? Because Trump seems to think, I would have just told him, don't do this, and they wouldn't have done it.
I mean, this is the most obvious compliment I can give him. I think that he is exceptionally pragmatic on being anti-war. And I think that that is one of the most positive characteristics that he showed. He was really the only president, I think, in modern history, right, Saxipoo, that hasn't gotten us embroiled in a new war.
No new wars, yeah.
It is the best part of him, yeah.
He's been incredibly consistent. So I suspect that there would have been some kind of a deal. I know that sounds so ridiculous to say, but there would have been a deal.
There would have been a deal. He's a deal maker.
I actually agree.
He's a deal maker.
He's a deal.
Jason, he gave a statement this week.
North Korea. He went to North Korea and met with...
He'll shake hands with anybody.
Exactly.
He would have fired all of the deep state blob that started to position anything towards a conflict. So I think he would have shut the door so ferociously on Ukraine and NATO, and anybody that crossed that line, he would have tarred and feathered publicly. And I think the end result would have been that Putin could have found an off-ramp well before he invaded. Probably.
Totally. Yes, I agree.
And
I agree
Trump
with that. And
blamed Germany for all this, right? He called it.
Well, Trump very early asked the question, why are we spending all this money to defend Germany when Germany has this big pipeline deal with Russia? It doesn't seem like they need our protection. They should just pay for it themselves. But I think there's a separate point that Chamath just made that is a really good point, which is Trump's instinctual resistance to what the deep state wants. And he actually said it this week. He gave a 2-minute televised statement that was all over Twitter, where he basically made the argument that, listen, the reason why we're in this war is because of the military-industrial complex and the foreign policy establishment. They basically courted this conflict, and they are working at odds with the interests of the American people. It's actually a fairly radical critique. I don't think a major presidential candidate has run against the military-industrial complex the way that he is now positioning himself. And let me tell you this, I've said it before, he's not my preferred candidate. But if this war spirals out of control, either, it turns into a even bigger conflict that draws us in, or it turns into a big recession, because I don't think we've seen the last of the supply shocks from this war. If we get a recession that Trump can, I think, lay at the feet of this war, he's positioning himself to take advantage of this. This could be a silver bullet for him. I don't think he has any other way of winning, but, if this turns into a big mess, Trump is positioning
Tinfoil
himself.
hat.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sachs.